have never been done before.
We the people tell the government what to do. It doesn't tell us. We the people are the driver. The government is the car. And we decide where it should go and by what route to do. We the people are free. And I hope we have once again reminded people that man is not free unless government is limited.
Well, g'day, folks. How are you? And happy Wednesday. I'll get it right eventually. Is it Wednesday? I hope it's Wednesday. Yes, because I'm going to be in Adelaide tomorrow. That'll be Thursday. Looking forward to getting down there and saying hi to everybody, of course, over the weekend. Big one planned in Wilmington. But if you are in Adelaide and you're interested in catching up, there might be an opportunity to have dinner Monday night. I'm going to be staying in Adelaide Monday night. Don't know where yet. Got to find somewhere to put me up. But I've got to catch a flight early on Tuesday morning. So we might be able to catch up in Adelaide for dinner on Monday night. Just email me, carl@vofhq.com, and we'll, if you're in that area, you'll probably have an idea of where we could catch up to. So if you can sort that out, give us a place, happy to catch up. In fact, I might be catching up with Paul Offey and maybe one or two others. So looking forward to that. At the head of the show, I want to tell you about tomorrow night's show. It will be pre-recorded. I've already done the interview, but it is important that you watch it if you own a self-managed super fund. Of course, yesterday, the dirty deal, as it's being termed, done by Labor and the Greens to push through not just the negative gearing and CGT changes that the government put forward in their budget, but they've also now taken on board a change that the Greens made yesterday in the negotiation that takes away the ability for you as an SMSF owner to use that vehicle to invest in a house or property or anything, particularly with borrowed funding. Cass explains it all, but that aside being, bad enough, there is much worse, much worse, and it involves the simple fact that there are more eyes now watching you on behalf of the government, or there will be after July 1, than you ever thought possible. This is a really serious show. It's only a short one tomorrow night, only goes about half an hour, but I urge you to watch it, because what she will tell you about what banks and other institutions, including Freedom Financial Solutions and other businesses like that, and much lesser businesses that aren't necessarily in the financial business as such, what they have to do coming up from July 1. It is scary. It is frightening. It is 1984. So be prepared for tomorrow night's show. Tonight, well, I'm really excited to have this guest on tonight. I am always a big fan of the military, as you know, and it's wonderful to speak with some of our veterans. I've been very fortunate over my life as the part of my life where I was driving limos to do a lot of veteran transfers. And I was able to spend a lot of time, particularly with Vietnam veterans who were close to my heart. My biological father was a Vietnam veteran. So I got to spend time with them, but a lot of World War I, a lot of World War II and Korea veterans as well. And veterans from other skirmishes, Malaya and that sort of thing. And of course, more recent adventures where we've been into places like Iraq and Afghanistan. Tonight's guest has spent pretty much all of his formative military and his younger life in the military. Got in pretty young, I suspect, wound up flying over the battlefields of Vietnam, and then came back to Australia and served with distinction, I think would be the only way you could describe him. He reached the heady rank, should I say, of squadron leader, but there is so much more to this man. He wound up becoming the fella that was in charge of, the officer in charge of the RAAF Air Museum at Point Cook, a simply magnificent facility. If you haven't been, please go and see it down at Point Cook, and we'll talk more about why you should go and see it very soon. And of course, he was also heavily involved with the introduction of the aircraft that replaced the Windshield, which was our training aircraft right up until the early 70s, when it was replaced by something called the CT4 trainer. It is with great respect and with great thanks to his service that we welcome Squadron Leader retired Dereck Fox to the Voice of Freedom. Thank you for your service, sir.
Oh, thanks very much, Carl, and appreciate the intro. And, I'm one of many veterans, so I give credence to all of them.
Well, absolutely. You don't put one above the other, but I don't get to speak to a lot of you guys, particularly one so distinguished as yourself. So I'm very grateful that you're happy to spend the time with me tonight, and we can talk about a few things. I suppose we should start off. We originally started having this conversation last week, late last week, and we thought, I was thinking, oh, great, I'll get you on for a really nice chat about flying and aviation. But you were on your way down to Point Cook last week to say goodbye to this wonderful piece of kit, the CT4 that I mentioned before. Can you just tell me about your involvement with this aircraft coming into service with the RAAF, Dereck?
Yeah, well, I was an instructor at Point Cook on the Windjiel, and it was on the 26th of May, believe it or not, I checked my logbook, 1975, when a mate of mine was doing proving flights and also doing instructor for mills with the CT4. And it was quite if you can visualise this, we had about 40 Windjiels lined up on the tarmac at Point Cook, just behind that photo that you've got of the CD4. And this tiny little aeroplane came in, and Phil Armitage was the instructor, and we were mates. And he said, we've got to do some proving flights on this. So we ended up doing it and found a lot of little minor things wrong. But at the time, the instructor said, that'll never replace a Windjiel. And long story short, over the years, it became a stalwart of an aeroplane. I've got to say, after the proving flights and subsequently flying it at Point Cook with the museum, and it is a lovely aeroplane, beautiful to fly. And there's the wing of a Windjiel, and that's the one that I was flying as well. But
beautiful.
So the CD4 is a fantastic trainer and a really stalwart part of the itinerary. These are Duncan's photos from last Thursday. I noticed you've got there.
Yes.
Well done, Carl. Well done. I mean, that was.
I just want to thank Duncan Fenn for. I didn't ask him, but I want to credit him. He's taken some magnificent photos. In fact, the next one I'm going to show you, which isn't of a CT4, it's of what essentially is today's CT4, I guess, the updated version. But he's taken some great photos. So I just want to recognise Duncan and his work, Duncan Fenn Photography. Go and check it out, folks, online if you like things aviation.
He's amazing. He started off just bringing his camera down, no money, no nothing. He was just an enthusiast, and I have to tell you, he's now become a volunteer of the RAAF Museum, and a fantastic bloke to have on board. And he's, as you can see by that photograph there of the PC-21, a superb photographer.
That shot there is absolutely brilliant. I mean, you can almost look into the cockpit. And, of course, this is the new training aircraft for the Australian Air Force. As you say, the PC-12, the Polaris. So you were lucky enough to get up close. This is Roulette 5 and 6 that came to Point Cook last week to, I helped send off the CT4s, I guess. They didn't offer you a ride in the back of one of those, did they?
No, they didn't. No. I've flown in the PC-9 with, in fact, my friend that did the aerobatic display, a beautiful job for the final showing of the CT4. That was Wing Commander Dave Chaplin, a lovely fella, and he did a tremendous job. And
would have been a bittersweet moment, I guess, last week. You'd be sitting around with a lot of your mates from the time where they were first introduced. As you said, there was a first and a last if you like, flights, and they were pretty special. But the dinner, can you just express to me what it was like sitting in the museum surrounded by these magnificent aircraft and going for an evening meal?
It's a great feeling, and I think Air Force dinners in hangars with aeroplanes around, hard to beat. I mean, for everybody that loves aeroplanes, ground upwards, it's just a beautiful way to eat dinner, and to have these wonderful aircraft just surrounding you while you're sitting down having a meal and chatting to some fantastic people. It's an atmosphere that can't be replicated, I don't think, anywhere, to be quite honest.
And we're not just talking, CT4 trainers that are parked around there. The museum has a huge range of aircraft, very spectacular aircraft, fighter aircraft that date back, well, I'm not probably sure whether they go back to World War I, but certainly there are some of the finer examples of what we've been fighting with for the last 60 years down there. And I think everybody should avail themselves. If you are in Melbourne or even in Victoria, you should be calling in and putting this on your must-see list.
Absolutely. No, the RAAF Museum is really amazing, and it's preserving the history of the RAAF. Wish it was funded a bit more. I wish we did what the United Kingdom, the United States do. We seem to be, unfortunately, taking our funding away from our heritage, and CT4 was a classic case of shutting down an aeroplane that didn't need to be shut down. It was done for, I believe, saving money reasons. Well, I'm half shares in a CT4 with a lovely man called Johnny Larter, who was a paramedic that suffered throughout the COVID thing. But, for them to shut it down for financial reasons, it was a joke, because it's historically incredibly significant.
Yeah.
And, I love the aeroplane. I've done 30 flights in it since January, and it's just a beautiful aeroplane. So once again, politics, government cutbacks, all that sort of thing, but I don't know how much you want to go into that.
I'm just wondering whether or not I might be able to convince you to fly that CT4 from where you are and meet me in Sqdn when Pays Aviation get their new Spitfire, their 2-seat Spitfire, open for business for people taking rides. I can't wait to go down there. I won't be able to afford a ride, but I'm going to just sit there and listen to it. Oh.
Well, we'll pre-arrange that, because we can go to Sqdn and take you up and turn you upside down in a CT4. I reckon you'd probably enjoy that.
Absolutely. Well, let's just touch on that. When you say you were a pilot trainer back at Point Cook, we should point out you were probably the first instructor roulette. Would that be the right way of putting it?
No, I wasn't a roulette. No, ever.
So you just taught aerobatics basically then?
Oh, well, most instructors back in those days, every Friday afternoon, we put on a demo for the students, and it was part of the deal that you did low-level aerobatics. And later on in 1982, when we had the first Wingill come onto the civil register, I actually flew at the Coolangatta Air Show and demonstrated it for the first time, and that was my entry into the civil warbird arena, and that's never ceased since then. So I've been doing aerobatics actually since 1972, but don't tell anyone.
You must be happy then to see things like the Gold Coast Air Show start cropping up.
It's great. Well, that was the first one in 1982 that I did, and it's terrific. It's good to see, because as far as I'm concerned, anybody that's an aviation buff, I mean, we don't get enough of looking at airplanes.
No, can't get enough, and especially along the beaches now on the Gold Coast, you can get up into the high rises, and it's very easy for you to take a shot like that or better, looking down into the cockpit of maybe something like an F-18 Growler or a F-35 Lightning as it comes past you. So very exciting things to be at. Can you give me an idea? What was your highlight of your military career, flying-wise? saying?
Oh, jeepers! You've touched on a lot of points there. It was all great. I mean, to be honest, I was very fortunate to get in at a young age, and I was the youngest Hercules captain. I was 22. I just turned 22 when I got my command, and boy, I felt that was a privilege. And
word.
The kind of flying we did around there at the time, where we used to fly through Southeast Asia, Borneo, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, and used to bring the wounded back from Vietnam, which was an interesting time. I learned a lot from a lot of people, and the flying instructing side at Point Cook, I was there for nearly 4 years as a flying instructor, and that was another fantastic time. I mean, teaching young blokes, and at that time there weren't any young ladies learning, but Vietnam War was on, so we were pumping through pilots at the rate of about 140 to 150 a year, which was quite substantial, because right now we're down to about 40 to 42.
I've always wanted to ask a military instructor, who gets the pilots, first day sort of thing. Back in the day, would you prefer to have a pilot who had taken some lessons and knew how to fly, basically, or would you prefer to teach them from the ground up?
It depended on the attitude of the person you were flying. As an example, we had one guy there that joined with, believe it or not, I think he had 4,200 commercial hours, but he wanted to be a military pilot. And sometimes with people that had that kind of experience, they would be questioning the way the military did it, because it was a different form of flying. It is a different form of flying. It's more disciplined, and it's more structured, and the aim of it is completely different. You're there to learn to fly as I often said, a weapons platform, but it wasn't always. We had Hercules and Orions, but that particular young man just said, "I'm here to learn," and he was magnificent. Whereas we've had others that came in with far fewer hours that said, "Well, I know about flying. I can ride horses," and they can be quite painful. But
was it easy for you to tell, for instance, who was talented enough to go into, say, jet training, and who you would farm to the Orions or to the Hercs or to various other elements of the RAAF? Was there a point in the training process where you knew yourself which way this person was going to go?
That's a very good question, Carl, because back then we actually used to cross train between people would go to Hercules and go to fighters, or they could go from fighters to Hercules. In fact, I trained our commanding officer onto the Hercules because he wanted the youngest training captain to train him, and he came from fighters. So getting back to the original premise there, when the war was on, the requirements for pilots were quite different. A lot of pilots went to the Huey. Of course, Vietnam was on.
Yep.
But for instance, a bloke like me, they figured that I was more a crew person, and crew people would be sent to crew type aeroplanes like the Hercules, the Orion, back in those days. And it wasn't back then. I know now they pick what they regard as the good hotshot type pilot to go to fighters, but it wasn't always like that. It was very, very much based on what you were best suited for. And in fact, when I left the Air Force in 1977, I was actually posted to Mirages. I was going from, would you believe, flying instructing on the Windshield to Mirages, but I ended up joining Trans-Australia Airlines instead.
Right.
So
Up
it wasn't
and away.
It wasn't always. I think these days they tend to think that the best go to fighters. Well, it's an interesting proposition, because you know, for a young guy, I can tell you now, it was daunting for me at the age of 22 to be a HERC captain. It actually, I objected to it, to the commanding officer, and he said, well, bad luck, son, you know, I've got these stripes on my shoulders and you'll do as you're told. So
Yeah.
it was a baptism of fire for a young bloke. And, you know, I was very humbled, and later on, you know, I think I became a reasonable HERC captain, but I was certainly struggling with age, and I've got another mate who was equivalent age on the E models in 37 Squadron, and you know all the other associated things with older guys in the squadron, older co-pilots, older flight engineers, and older loadmasters. It was a bit of a struggle just through the age thing alone.
So, I guess there's been a lot of changes. You're talking about the old days and the old guys. I just want to bring up the web page for the museum at the moment. Sorry, I'm just going to move it around so I can see what I'm doing here. So I've got to say, really, really in-depth website, and you can have a look and see the aircraft that are on display. The missions and values there are all set out. A common understanding of the Air Force identity, values, and purpose strengthens the Air Force culture. There's that word. We've heard a bit about culture in the last few days, haven't we, after Pauline's speech?
Yep.
But as I say, this is the overview. We scroll down and we go to our culture. And immediately we are struck with gender diversity, cultural and religious diversity, Indigenous participation, and LGBTIQ plus inclusion. Before we get to anything like the brand, which I imagine has rainbow colours in it these days, how does that make you feel, particularly after what you've been through and the service that you've put through? Is this the way our military you thought was going to go?
No, absolutely not. I've noted the Prime Minister quoted today that our diversity is our strength. Well, there's not strength in diversity, there's strength in unity. And
yes.
the fact that we've created this diversity within the armed service is creating a separation gap. And the armed service is supposed to be inclusive, and we're all a team, and we're people that like to be together and support each other, and it shouldn't be like this. I mean, just from a normal common sense point of view, we're a team, and in a team there are diverse people. Of course there are, and you love that kind of thing. You like people to be individuals. I mean, that's important, and they exert their own individual traits, and that brings a lot to the table. But this idea of diversity through LGBTIQ and DEI and all that sort of thing, it should not even be highlighted. Now, look, I had mates who were gay, and back in my day, it wasn't put out front. In fact, they used to keep it themselves. But what they did, they blended into the team, and they left their preference sexually or otherwise. That was left away from the unit, away from the Air Force, and that's the way it should be. To me, it's a private thing, and that's probably an old-fashioned.
It's what's meant to happen in business now. I mean, you can't look at the person you work with sideways for fear they might think you're coming onto them in some way. So, you know, it's essentially the same thing, isn't it?
Well, you know, remember that old top movie called The Vibe? Well, we used to be better at picking up the vibe. If somebody you liked was, making a go at you, you know, whether it was a woman or a man or whatever, you knew it was supposed to be right because you could feel the vibe. You were friends or you had common interests. I mean, we've taken away our own individual perception, I think, Carl, if I want to put it. Allow people to be able to have the freedom to make a choice. But don't tell them that they've got to like so-and-so because they don't have to.
So
You don't have to like anybody, but you know what they're taking away from us is our what I call free will. Our
yeah,
free will
yeah,
to make a choice. You've got a choice to make a friend or not to have a friend. You have the choice to bring someone close to you or not to bring them close to you. I mean, that's human nature.
yeah.
Uh, and within a
And
unit, we used to try hard to help each other because we were all in the same unit.
you're very on point, I think, with that vibe argument. I mean, I know pilot seats can be tight, but you shouldn't have to cut your testicles off to fit in the seat. Uh, and I don't blame the airman who wants to become an airwoman per se for this. The blame has to go further up the chain or further back the chain, if you like. And I remember from my time applying to join the Defence Forces, there is a psych evaluation. What's
Yep.
happened in our recruiting process where we are now essentially allowing people who don't know who they are to decide somewhere between basic training and their first, squadron that I now want to be a woman. In my case, I'd be a man. Now I want to be a woman. And you can cut my bits off thanks at the taxpayer expense. And then I guess at the loss of active duty time to the Defence Forces, because imagine if you cut your bits off, you're going to have a little bit of downtime before you've got back in the seat, so to speak.
At the risk
It's
of
just
being,
shocking to me.
yeah, at the risk of being rude, I mean, it's just bloody madness. I'm speechless, to be quite honest, that we've got to this stage. It's a human being is.
And you're not the only one. I'm sure your colleagues are the same. You've probably discussed this last week over the lovely dinner.
Oh, there's a lot of discussion about it, and the thing is that this is divisive. Let's be quite honest, because it's robbing us of our choice to choose our own friends and to choose those that we don't want to be so friendly with, and that happens in every job, in every walk of life. I mean, just because you're in the same outfit doesn't mean you're all going to get along, but what it does mean is that you try to, because you want some unity within the squadron or within the wing or whatever it is that you're associated with, but you don't want woke, and I mean woke, senior officers imposing this kind of regime on the lower ranks. It's not right. It's just not
And
right.
yet, it's what we've got. And I mean, I remember Angus Campbell in fishnecks and high heels, but I can't recall too much before that where there was just this blatant acceptance. If that's what you want to do, let's do it. And you and I were discussing a major, I think it is, wandering around Canberra at the moment in high heels and a dress, and walking into meetings with a voice deeper than mine. So, where did the focus become on the person rather than the team when the Defence Force is all about the team? And I should say protecting Australia rather than spending the money on having your bits cut off.
You hit on a point earlier on. The recruiting process has changed dramatically since I started. Now, when I started, and you said psych testing, well, that's a huge part of it, but we were psychometrically tested. We had aptitude tests, we had medical tests, we had board interviews. I remember mine went for 3 or 4 days. I was shocked when I got through some of the testing, but recently, when the Air Force asked me back, would you believe, at the age of 70, to do some of the flying for the number 100 squadron and be a mentor and a training pilot, I was re-recruited by a mob called a DECO, which do the recruiting for the Defence Force. Now, they're a British company and they're a civilian company, and they're recruiting for the armed forces. Now, in my day, the Army, the Navy and the Air Force recruited from within those ranks. There were no civilians involved. In fact, the guy that was the wing commander in charge of recruiting in Melbourne was a friend of mine, and I actually spoke at his funeral, but he was disgusted in the way it was travelling, because I'll give you one example. When I was recruited back, I had to go through a series of tests. They waived a lot of the tests because of my background, and they had my history, of course, but I had to do a psych test. And COVID was on, and I was doing a Zoom call with a young lady, and not being disparaging, but we went through a series of questions that went for over an hour and a half. And at the end of the hour and a half, she said, "You've got PTSD." And I said, "No, I haven't." And she said, "Yes, you have." And I said, "I don't know what brings you to that conclusion." Well, she said, "For all you've been through, the Vietnam War, one of the incidents I had in Cathay Pacific in the 747 was quite substantive. Yes, I've had 3 marriage breakups, and a lot of that was the pilot's dispute of '89 and a whole other bunch of factors." But she said, "Did you go and see a psych?" And I said, "No, I didn't." And to quote Crocodile Dundee,
back in those days, you just dealt with it. You pushed on, or you fell apart, I guess.
Well, look, I was my background as a child, we were very poor. We were extremely poor. I had 42 moves before I was 18. We never have a car, never had a television set, never had anything. And the psych back then said, "Good on you, son. You've come to this standard and all by yourself, and pretty much put yourself through your schooling, and you were keen on doing it, and paper around in the morning to help pay for the rent, and working at an Amoco garage after school, and did my homework there because we had no money." And,
yeah.
And for a week I went without food on the odd occasion. But, this psych in the modern Adecco firm accused me of PTSD. And I said, "No, I've got mates," to quote Crocodile Dundee. And I said, when we had problems, we talked to our mates, went to the pub. "Oh, no, not good enough." And that actually held up my entry for quite a while, to the point where it got to Air Force, and Air Force had had enough. Had some mates in Canberra that said, "No, bugger this, Foxy, we'll put you in straight away." And I was in the next day. And then Adecco rang a week later and said, "Oh, we're still processing your psych interview." Well, I said, "I'm sorry, I'm back in the Air Force now as a squadron leader." And then they complained to the Air Force.
Good God.
So there is the measure of the recruiting process. And I could tell you countless stories of people being held up, getting into the armed forces. One bloke, a lieutenant colonel in the SAS, was invited back, and he had to go through all this process. 22 months later, Adecco still hadn't put him back in. And so he said, "Jam it, I'm not going back in." Now, that's someone they wanted.
Yeah.
And I've got countless stories like that. But what I'm getting to is that is affecting the whole standard of intake within the Defence Force. And
I imagine you... Sorry?
Sorry. I was going to say my apologies to Deco, but that's not sincere.
No, that's nothing like that. I get the idea that they're being paid on a budget. You can only interview so many people. You can only do so much work over so many hours over the year. Otherwise, that level of incompetency, amongst other things, is staggering. Frightening. I used to be a huge advocate for Defence Force recruiting. I've had some of the best times of my life through Defence Force recruiting, and I am dismayed now, because for the last 15 years at least, I haven't and wouldn't recommend a career in the Defence Forces to any young person who would ask. Whereas previously I would hype it up, talk it up as much as I possibly could. Today, I would say, look, if you want to go in, how brave are you? How honourable are you? And are you prepared to stand up to an officer who gives you what could be an unlawful order. And that's essentially where I feel a lot of us are today. And a lot of serving military people today, the morale must be down there. I assume you still have contacts in the active side of things?
I do, and that's a very good point you made there, because morale has been affected in more ways than one. The closure of the bases, this diversity, equity, inclusivity, all of the above is affecting the morale, because they're basically diminishing our armed forces, and financially they are too. Even though they won't admit it, they're not financing the armed forces the way that they used to. It's just, no. And the thing is that, how do I put this reasonably politely? The senior
You don't
officers,
have to.
No, well, the senior officers in Canberra are nothing of the calibre that the ones that I used to know back in our day. Yeah, we actually had an Air Vice Marshal, and God bless him, I don't know where he is now, but he stood up against Bob Hawke in the pilots dispute in full uniform on Cole Brown's Channel 10, and told him that he was a criminal for bringing in the armed forces in the pilots dispute. And he got up in full uniform. And God bless him. And there were other senior officers like that. But you won't get them standing up against the government now. And I find that difficult, because the oath that I took was to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, her heirs and successors, not to Prime Minister Albanese or any of the previous Prime Ministers.
Whoever he appoints. Yeah.
And we've lost our way in that really the Governor General is the person who's in charge of the military. Well, the Governor General is appointed by none other than our Prime Minister. And
so we were talking about this. We were talking about this last week. The Governor General is in fact the leader of all defence forces in Australia, the Supreme Commander of Defence Forces in Australia. If one of her commanders were to come to her and say, Governor General, we believe that there has been a shift in the powers. We believe that the separation of powers has been breached. Something has to change here. Government can't control the courts. And ordinarily you would expect the governor to say, all right, well, let's suspend the government, have a look at what's going on, and we'll fix it. But if they don't do that, then the military, I would have thought, has a right to rise up and say, right, well, this has to stop. But you're saying at the moment it gets to her and hits a brick wall.
I don't even think it gets to her now.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Albanese a few months ago said that we were having an alliance with the Indonesian Armed Forces. Nothing wrong with that. But the way he put it, it was as though he was in charge of the armed forces. Now, technically he's the Prime Minister, but he is not in charge. And the armed forces, by very nature of their job, should not be political. They serve Australia, the country of Australia, the people of Australia, and defend that country, not political ideology. And I believe this particular government thinks they own the military, but the officers in charge are not what they used to be. That's all I can say. They don't have that kind of.
That might explain why the army has gone out of Australia and decided to recruit somebody from New Guinea to be in charge of our defence forces. I think a battalion commander out of Townsville, who now heads our defence forces, and any New Guinea soldier, military defence personnel that wants to come to Australia and sign up gains automatic citizenship after their return of services paid. How does that make you feel?
It's a complete destruction of the process. We were all recruited in my day equally, and we had the equal psych tests. We had equal aptitude tests. You know, I can't tell you the number of tests we went through, but those tests were equal for everybody. It didn't matter whether you were New Guinean. In fact, in the RAAF, we had some fantastic foreign people, but we were recruited equally. I don't know how I can emphasise that more. Right now, there is this, and you hit on it earlier on, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And oh well, no, we've got to have our quota on officers' courses now in the Air Force of 50% female. Well, I've met some magnificent female officers, but it should be on merit alone, pure merit.
Yep,
and
couldn't agree more.
And what if there were 90% females that were good, then take them. But if there were also equally 90% men that were good, you take them. But this idea of having 50-50, that is not equalising the talent. And
I can vouch for the talent of the females. I once had a drink with a female F-111 pilot. Wonderful woman, drank me under the table. I never flew with her, but yeah, made a hell of a mess of me.
Of course, and God bless her. And we had and we still have some fantastic, very competent female Army, Navy, Air Force personnel. But let's recruit us all equally. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Recruiting at the moment is pretty hard. They're not getting the people signing up they once were. And I think they've lowered the recruiting standards now that they'll basically accept somebody who's 25 kilos overweight, walks with a limp and speaks with a lisp. I don't know whether or not that's the kind of Army, Navy or Air Force personnel I'm looking for. Hopefully they can train them up. But it's very hard to recruit when we're talking about morale, when the civilians are made aware of the claims through the Brereton report of supposed war crimes committed by Ben Robert-Smith, our most decorated soldier that's wandering around still today, I think. Ben Robert-Smith was, dug out of the Brereton report along with a few others, but very, very, very few others, to be singled out for pretty special treatment. Now, the Brereton report was put together and works under the auspices of the AFP and the Office of Special Investigation. There's no Nazi overtones to that at all, the OSI. Now, would you or any of your Vietnam colleagues be concerned if they decided they were going to go back and have a look at the books from 60 years ago? And would you be concerned that the powers they have could drag you before a civilian court and you would face war crimes?
Oh, you hit on this is reprehensible. This is disgusting what's happening. I've written about this Ben Robert-Smith area and I've posted it out on Telegram. It is a bloody disgrace. I mean, talk about kangaroo court. And I hope Nick McKenzie is watching this because, mate, you are a bloody disgrace of a journalist. To make, really to increase your own fame, you've defamed a person he's got more courage in his little fingertip than you've got in your entire body, and you call yourself a journo. And the fact is that they've taken up on this and that the government has acted upon it, and the senior officers should have said, not acceptable, we're not going down that track. And really, he should have, in all fairness, if there was any substantiation, why wasn't he court-martialed?
Yeah, exactly.
Why civil court? I mean, court-martial is...
Well, apparently because he's no longer in the military, he can't be court-martialed, which I believe is bullshit. Once you've served in a regiment like the SAS, you can be recalled at their whim and pen wave, although you're suggesting now that a deco are involved, that can take a bit longer. But he could be sequestered back into the military at any time and court-martialed inside the military system, but they chose not to do that. They created a new OSI group, which pains me, but it must take the breath away from distinguished veterans of this nation that this could, in theory, I'm not suggesting it will, but it could, in theory, happen to you.
It could, but the issues go far deeper than that, and you know that. It's the destruction of morale, and it's almost as though this present government is actively trying to wreck the armed forces of this country. Now, if ever you want to destroy morale, do what you've done to Ben Roberts-Smith. And I can tell you now, a lot of people that I talk to, and I've got quite a few military mates, ex and current, it's absolutely unfounded. They can't prove it. They haven't proven it. They've spent $320 million on this bloody rubbish that they're producing, when really they should be praising a brave man. And the other thing is, and we all are well aware of it, and I had mates that were in Vietnam that never came back the same way. You try to think like a normal, sensible human being when you know your enemy could be in a farming village by day and shooting you by night, or harbouring and putting out kids with armed vests on to blow you to smithereens, and you're supposed to treat them as you should treat a civilian in Australia who's a farmer, or in Europe who's a farmer, when you can't do it. You don't trust anybody. And, when they went out in those villages back in his day, you couldn't trust a soul. Now, I defy anybody, particularly that Nick McKenzie, to go out into the battlefield for 6 months and see how you mentally take that particular amount of stress, and I can bet you won't.
He couldn't last 6 hours in the battlefield. He'd be killed by a ricochet, sadly.
Yeah, I reckon he'd be killed by more than that, and I won't say anything else.
And Chris Masters alongside of him. From a guy who worked in mainstream media for 40 years, I know what a privilege it is to get such close access, particularly to special operations groups, and to treat that access with such disrespect is so dishonourable, not only to your profession but to the kind of person you are. It is just disgusting to me. But then, of course, we are talking about Channel 9, and they've peddled disgust and filth their entire existence. I've got to be a bit fair. They were much better when Kerry Packer was in charge. Back in the day, they were much better. But these days, nothing 9 does, I think, is any. Anyway, let's get off that. With regards to what's going on with Ben Roberts-Smith and Ollie Schiltz and others, then all we can do is hope and pray that things will change. Do you think if One Nation were to come to power, that would change things? It would, I think, in Ben's case, admittedly.
I do. I've been following Pauline and the party for many years, and she's the only one that's been consistent, so over 30 years, in what she wants and the party wants out of this country. And I have met her. My lovely lady's met her. We actually saw her on October the 8th in last year, and Malcolm Roberts. I really believe the reception they got was well deserved. There were about 4,500 of us there in Canberra that time, and honestly, she had time for everybody. She talked to us. We had photos with her, but she's throwing out a consistent message, and the message is, as far as I'm concerned, of integrity and honesty and ethics. It's very hard to make a balance of all of that when you're in a government, and I think she's fully aware of all the problems that she'll be held accountable for. But she's quite adamant about the immigration. There's fine people that have come to this country and made it the country it is, but let's toss out the ones that don't want to be a part of us. let's toss out the ones that want to segregate and want to form their own communities. We don't need that. We want a united Australia. And that's all she's asking for. And I know that, you know, Malcolm Roberts and I have had a couple of chats, and I think he's, with his background as an engineer and the CEO of a mining company, he's got the runs on the board, and they're picking those kind of people, these active people that have been active in life, to run this country. They won't run it
Actually
perfectly.
have experience.
They won't. They've got experience.
Yeah, Barnaby's an accountant, so I'd respect what he had to say about the Treasury Department, given that he's an accountant. He wouldn't put me in charge. Well, this government would put me in charge, and I'm dyslexic when it comes to numbers. So they'd think I'm the perfect person to be in charge of Treasury.
Well, they don't have the skin in the game. That's all I can say. And I think it's the way I'll put it. And actually, a few of my service mates and I were talking about this just recently. They should put every politician through psych testing, psychometric testing, medical testing, and they should be found if they are not psychologically suitable. And I believe that 80% of them aren't. You know, they're there for the money. They're there to further their own interests. They'll retire on a lovely pension, and that's all they're doing is feathering their own nest. They don't give a damn about us normal people.
No, and Labor's full of narcissists and psychopaths and sociopaths. So
exactly, and they are.
And they've never worked a day in their life for the moment. Well, other than two of them, I believe, and those days of work are a little bit iffy. Let me just move on very quickly. You spent a lot of your civilian career training pilots, but you also got a very senior position with CASA, involved in the overseeing of and licensing of pilots and currency of pilots here in Australia. That's a very, very serious role, and I imagine has put you deep in the heart of CASA over the since you got out of the military at any rate, and civilian flying career. Thank you once again for all your efforts in that area. I know that a couple of years ago you were lined up for the opportunity potentially to become the head of CASA at a time where there's been huge changes in the aviation industry coming in, with drones particularly, and the licensing of drones, the availability and the cheap availability of that sort of aviation hardware, and the dangers involved with that sort of hardware. And I must say, there must be very few better credentialed human beings under the Australian flag who could be better for this job as the head of CASA. And yet you were pipped by a bureaucrat who came out of another government department that had nothing whatsoever to do with aviation for the job. The job, mind you, pays a little under $1 million a year. I know, without being bitter about it, you might have something to say.
Well, it was a very interesting time. In fact, I saw today, when I was sending you my resume, but I actually applied in 2020 for Pip Spencer's job. I was rung by the lawyers, and I'll leave it low key, but they said that I was the right fit for the job, but I was never going to get it. She'd been pre-selected, and the primary words they used is that you aren't political enough. And I said, yeah, well, that would be true, because I'd probably tell the truth about my perception of aviation. And I said, you wouldn't want that in aviation, would you? You wouldn't want a truthful person to be running it.
You wouldn't want the truth, no.
No, you wouldn't.
You would want someone with honour.
Well, somebody that knows the business. And, I've had a pretty extensive civil career. I ended up being the chief pilot of Tiger, and I was a CEO for a while, and I've had 3 chief pilot jobs, and military and civil aviation to a reasonable extent. Nobody will ever know it completely, but I certainly have covered all the spectrums of flying, and I had 9 years in Cathay Pacific on the Boeing 747. So I've seen aviation in many different spectrums, and to pick a bureaucrat out of Canberra to be the head of CASA makes no bloody sense at all. Let's be fair.
I think it borders on dangerous, but it's been done for a reason. And I believe she's just been re-employed without any submission or any chance for anybody else to stick their hand up and say, hey, listen, I might like to have a go. She's been re-employed for another 2 years, so God help us. But it sort of leads me to the next question. You strike me as a very honourable man. You strike me as someone whose word can be trusted, and you speak the truth. And you've outlined it exactly. You're exactly the wrong person for anybody deeply involved with government. I have to ask you a question. Given how many thousands of hours have you got behind you in everything, do you think?
About 21,000 hours now.
Okay, that's domestically, internationally, and everything from a little 2-seater trainer all the way through to a 747 doing international runs. I've got to ask you about chemtrails. So, chemtrails, there's another question I've got to ask you too. I'm sure you'll guess it. But chemtrails, if chemtrails, and I've got to say, I believe they exist. If there are overflight agreements in place, which are in place with the UN and other agencies around the world, wouldn't it require the rubber stamping by CASA for overflight and associated other things? Wouldn't it require somebody from CASA to stand up and say, oh, chemtrails, that's all bullshit. You're all, go and put your tin hat on and run away. Or are you, once again, are you one of the folks who believes that there are no chemtrails, that this isn't happening?
I believe there are companies that have been, and I do know this, that have been hired to do cloud seeding, and that's an absolute fact. Now, I have been told that some of the units in the United States Air Force have been used for, or basically they call it cloud seeding, but look, it's way beyond anything that I've been involved in. But the reality of it is that I've had people say to me, airliners have got it. Well, I can tell you, no way. Unless it's a specific airline that's maybe bought by the government and they've got some nefarious kind of aim, but no. It exists, of course it exists, but on the scale that some people think, no. A lot of people are saying that those contrails, particularly around Europe in the wintertime, which crisscrosses the entire of Europe, they are contrails. They are caused by the fact that the jet exhaust's running at around about 770 degrees centigrade, and cold air, moist air will form contrails, and that's how it happens.
Yep.
And particularly if you've got what they call condensation nuclei, just little particles of soot in the fuel, and then you'll get cold air that forms water droplets around it, and it'll, depending on the stability of the atmosphere, it'll sit there for hours. And, it gives that impression. But
I've never seen it. I've never seen a contrail. Well, I've seen one sit for hours, but it doesn't spread to 10 or 15 kilometres wide in that time. It thins out. It doesn't get thicker. But anyway,
no.
Be that as it may, I'm not here to dispute the facts, and you've got much more flying time than me, which leads me to my next question. And with your CASA experience and all of this disclosure that's been going on in the last couple of weeks, we've had UFO disclosures coming out of the White House. We've had military disclosures coming in front of the White House and the Capitol building. Can you give me an idea? Have you ever seen anything flying around that you've thought, that's not one of ours?
Yes, in a Hercules one night coming back from Darwin. In fact, the co-pilot looked out the window and he said, what's that? And then the flight engineer looked, and then I looked, and we actually said, are we having a mass hallucination?
Wow.
So, and I've got friends that have seen yeah, and what happened is the thing just darted off at almost right angles, did another bloody turn, and then came back and sat there, and then disappeared, gone. So when I first joined the Air Force, they call us bog rats. We were young pilot officers, straight off pilot's course. And one of my secondary duties was, believe it or not, unit UFO officer. And
Right.
I remember saying to the CO, "You've got to be joking. You're pulling the middle leg, aren't you, sir?" And he said, "Never been more serious in my life." And the sergeant and myself spent 2 years going into a room with a big safe, and we had half the combination of the lock, and we used to look at these UFO files at least once a week, and we had to keep the CO updated. And believe me, they're out there. I've got no doubt about it. But what they're saying now, don't know what they're saying now, but it certainly affected the way we thought. And there were some concepts put out throughout those files that I could probably have a bottle of red with you, that it'd overturn a lot of our society right now, actually. But they're there, they exist, and why wouldn't they? You know, you've got a universe that's got, as far as we know, 400 million galaxies, and every galaxy's got 200 million suns, and every sun's got planets running around it. You know, just on the law of probability, there's got to be something else out there, and hopefully,
I would agree.
Hopefully more intelligent than we are.
So I gather by the way that you've explained that, if I was to ask you, is the world flat, I'd get an answer in the negative.
Absolutely. All of our nav charts, everything we do, is based on the fact that the world's round. The Mercator's charts were produced, all the angles, and I've actually been high enough to actually see the curvature of the Earth. And the only way I'll put it to you in one, I don't, if you had a well that was about 10 feet deep, and 800 kilometers away you had a well, same well, and the sun was sitting right over you, and so the well was completely lit, the one 800 kilometers away would have a shadow in it. And they'd have a shadow, right, because the world is round. And, you know, I've seen it anyway. I mean, all of our navigation, everything that we do is based on the fact that the world is round. And, you know, is the moon a flat plate? No, I don't think so. The whole universe is actually revolving. Our closest star, which is Alpha Centaurus, is 4.24 light years away from us. That's our closest star.
Yeah.
And, you know, when they look at it through telescopes, everything is revolving around everything. And the intelligence is behind the physical universe is phenomenal. You know, it's way beyond my comprehension, but the whole reason we get day and night is because the Earth's revolving.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's why we have all the time zones we have. I mean,
yep. Thank you for your enlightened view. I bow to your experience. I learned to fly, but where you have 21,000 hours, I have 20, because I learned to fly and then ran out of money to actually go flying. So
understandable.
I bow to your knowledge and experience. I just want to thank you again, Dereck, for coming on tonight and joining us. I've enjoyed this chat tremendously, and I have no doubt maybe we will get to that bottle of red and sit down and record another conversation. It could be a very, very interesting chat, and I will try and make that a date down at Pays Aviation in Sqdn when the Spitfire gets going.
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll have a chat later off air, but we'll certainly bring the CD4 down and take you for a spin in that. And of course, the Spitfire.
I'll be right up for that.
Yeah, the Spitfire is just one of the most magnificent, beautifully designed aeroplanes ever. It's just a thing of beauty.
Yeah, thing of great beauty. And look, if we're going to talk about the Spitfire, I guess I've got to talk about the P-51 Mustang as well. But I've been lucky enough to be at air shows where you've got two of them, one of each, and listening to the sounds of those engines as they come past you at low level at full noise, I'm getting goosebumps on my skin just talking about it. I think I was a pilot of one of them in another life. So
you probably will.
Yeah, absolutely. Dereck, thank you for your service to our country and to our nation in civilian life. I do hope you get a bite of the CASA cherry one day, and we might lean on you from time to time to come back in and have another chat with us if you would.
No, well, thank you for the privilege, and also thank you for supporting our veterans and supporting this country in the way you do. I do appreciate it. Thanks very much, Carl.
No, anything we can do to help our veterans, and people only need to reach out. So Carl at vofhq.com, and we'll endeavour to get you help. And if you've got kids that need help, then Maddie French, I'm not sure if you're aware of Maddie French, former 3RAAF, who's got a magnificent program happening in the Central Coast area of New South Wales for kids who not doing the best in school, like to be a little rough around the edges. This is a course that is changing kids' lives for the better. And of course, we thank Matty for his service, but more particularly what he's putting into the use of this country. It's amazing what our returned servicemen and women are doing, and can't thank you all enough for everything that you're doing to help us get through this time. Thanks, Dereck. Really, thanks for joining us.
No, all the best, and also Matty French. I mean, helping young people, wonderful thing to do. It's our future.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. Absolutely. Thank you, sir. Look forward to talking to you again very soon. And ladies and gentlemen, that'll be it for me tonight. I'm on the Big Silver Bird with no propellers tomorrow, and into Adelaide, catching up with Vincenzo, who, Vince, if you will be so kind, you will have to play the closer. Considering you're in the back room, you'll be able to do that, I hope, because my screen's locked up and I can't move it. I will put up a little screen block at the end, though. Don't forget tomorrow night, folks, the interview with Cass Smith. I must see. You will be shocked. You will be horrified. You will be really pissed when she tells you the extent that the government's eyes are coming to look at everything about you. Everything. You've got to be very careful about who you talk to. All right, folks, going to love you and leave you. With a bit of luck, Vincenzo is ready to push the button. So without further ado, I will see you in Adelaide tomorrow. In fact, tomorrow night, we'll be at the Vetnam Showgrounds, if anybody is in the area and wants to call in. Vetnam Showgrounds with a few of Vince's mates. After that, we're heading off up north into Wayno's town. I'm looking forward to a big weekend at Wayno's at Wilmington. So looking forward to that. We may well strike. You never know. Hopefully strike in just a waving kind of way and no other way. The odd dickhead on the road. Let's hope not. Let's hope we can avoid them. Look forward to seeing you if you can catch up with us while we're in Adelaide. See you soon.
You let one ant stand up to us, then they all might stand up. Those puny little ants outnumber us 100 to 1. And if they ever figure that out, there goes our way of life. It's not about food. It's about keeping those ants in line. That's why we're going back. Does anybody else want to stay? Let's rock!